Motion's been made by Mr. Underwood, seconded by Mr. Black, to approve RZ 05-2012 for WNet Partners. Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. The motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much. And our next order of business is, I think you're still here, Mr. Fincham, discussion of PRTC or possible membership in PRTC, the Potomac Rappahannock Transportation Commission, and subsequently a tie into VRE. I spoke to Mr. Allen, who is the Chief Executive Officer for VRE, shortly before the meeting. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to come down here, but he's willing to come at our November meeting to discuss some things. I believe the actual members of PRTC want a commitment discussion from the Board of Supervisors to see if we are, ready to join. I think we should wait until we've talked to Mr. Allen. So we're going to ask Mr. Fincham to just provide us the additional information, and we'll go from there. Mr. Fincham.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, you have a memo that I prepared for, I guess, the previous board meeting. Basically, we did some research and compared our prices with and without the 2.1% fuel tax, comparing our interchange to other interchanges along the I-95 and I-85 corridors to see what or try to determine what the impacts of the fuel tax would be. I think you have that spreadsheet. We generally were competitive, except along the I-85 corridor, and according to industry experts, the I-85 corridor is probably more competitive than the 95 corridor in that they had a number of new facilities open up within the last 5 to 10 years, a lot of competition driving down the prices. The other area of concern that I guess we noted would be competition with other facilities in Virginia. Obviously, if Caroline were to adopt or were to join PRTC and to implement the 2.1% fuels tax, other areas that are currently competitive with our interchange, we don't know what they would do. So that's I guess a question that we really can't answer. Again, we were trying to compare, one of the concerns expressed was how we would compare with other truck stops similarly situated along the corridor. So we did this analysis so the board could take a look at that.
And I think that was what the board had asked for. The one thing I've asked this of Mr. Allen, and I'll ask it of you too, the fuel, the 2.1% fuel tax is for all fuel. We can't just do it on gas and not diesel, or diesel and not gas. It has to be all fuel across the board. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. It's my understanding that the only exemptions are your interstate bus carriers, which aren't automatically exempt, but they can apply to be reimbursed, as I understand it.
Oh, like common carriers, like Greyhound, Trailways,
yes,
if they, okay.
But you're correct. The fuel tax would apply to both gasoline and diesel.
And diesel. And there's no way to separate the two?
That's my understanding, yes, sir.
Okay.
That would require an amendment to the state enabling legislation to do that.
Okay. All right. I think this was just for information. So if the board will allow us to hear what Mr. Allen says, we'll see what we go from there. Okay? All right, 5A was, Mr. Seeley, you had some questions about the change orders for the YMCA?
Mr. Chairman, I did receive a package of the change orders. I have matched them against the list of the change orders that were actually submitted as bills. Some of the concerns I have, and I think that there are a way to mitigate some of these, and my primary concern is auditing of the funds at a later date by our audit firm at the end of the year. None of the change orders have been signed by the architect. They've been signed by the actual builder and Barney Riley, the executive director for the YMCA. I guess my question is that all of these are AIA forms, and they actually have a space for the architect's signature and probably should be signed at least by somebody to review what's taken place. There are a number of change orders that appear to be the same. 6R and 10 seem to contain the same verbiage and the same cost. Same is true for 19 and 20. There are 6 change orders in the package that aren't in the cost structure, but they're in the package of change orders. I think there are a number of questions where there are some things that we've paid for. It says fencing at base of revised stockpiles, $1,900. I think they should have provided how many feet and the cost per foot for that. I think these could be resolved, and one of the ways I'd like to at least suggest it be resolved is to allow the county administrator and the building official to sit down with Thurston Company and Barney Riley from the YMCA and at least discuss what the changes are. Again, auditing purposes wise, somebody sits down with these,
Okay.
it's going to stick out like a sore thumb.
Okay. Well, first of all, we're going to ask Mr. Cully to check with the auditors to see if that's something that they would frown upon, considering the nature of the project. And then Mr. Emerson just said he would talk to them if we can. So we will follow up on that, and you can respond directly to Mr. Seeley.
Because, I mean, we're paying, they're submitting bills. I'm just making sure that we have the correct data that's being submitted. And again, what's not accounted for is roughly $2,130 in change orders that are actually here that aren't recorded against the project, but there are a number of things in the project that look like they're duplicates in change orders.
Well, we're going to ask staff to take care of that. Respond directly to Mr. Seeley, and if you would, just copy the rest of the board so we'll all have it for information. And I think what you gave Mr. Seeley, the rest of us didn't get. I think Mr. Akers said you didn't get that?
I didn't get a copy.
Okay.
Why didn't we get a copy?
You did?
I thought he was the only one that was asking for it. I would gladly give a copy to everybody.
Yeah, let's make sure, in the future, let's make sure everybody gets a copy.
Yeah, he was the only one
So
asking
we all
for
have
it, but I think that we ought to be able to
We
look
all-
at it and have
we all
it.
gonna
Yeah,
get a
copy
copy.
now. I'll make a copy
Okay.
for everybody. It was a pretty thick stack.
Well, Mr. Underwood and I will take ours electronically. If you can scan them in, that'll be fine, but, okay. So we'll take care of it. Mr. Black, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I had a question. Last time when Mr. Riley was here from the YMCA, I was asking a series of questions in regards to county committees or the Rappahannock YMCA committee, Caroline County YMCA committee. It is my understanding that a YMCA committee is being formed. My concern with that is, obviously Caroline County needs a YMCA committee. I would feel more comfortable if that YMCA committee was like a lot of our other committees where it's one member per district. That each district, magisterial district in the county gets to pick someone from my YMCA committee. So I would like the board to, take that up. The second thing that we had talked about, and I don't know, Mr. Cully, if you got that information, I had asked for information about when the donation was made by Abundant Life Academy, Beverly Run LLC, to the YMCA. I have not received the when that donation came in.
Mr. Mann,
It was just here.
Mann said that he couldn't remember the exact date, but it was like the last week of July, before the August payment was due.
Thank you. As far as the committee, is that something that we can put on the agenda to discuss as far as if it's a local committee? I mean, because we have $5 million invested, at least $5 million invested in this YMCA. And if it's county money being used to pay for this, I feel like there should be a representative from each district on that committee.
You want to respond?
I would.
Go right ahead.
Okay, and I understand what you're saying, but my understanding is that that committee is up to the Y.
It's not a committee, it's a board of directors.
It's a board of directors. And the Y basically determines who the board of directors are.
That's not what Mr. Riley said to us last time.
Again, my understanding is, and from what I can understand, no other
You sniffle.
Wise.
Come on, man. Suck it up.
board of directors are appointed by local governing bodies. They have their own board of directors. They choose who they want to serve. Now, maybe if a board member would like to serve, they could ask them. But I don't know that we can force them to do that, as the board of directors is chosen by the Y, not by the local governing body.
Mr. Chairman, my concern once again is the fact that the taxpayers from Port Royal to Dawn to Lake Landor to Charlesburg to Lake Caroline to anywhere you go in this county are right now bumping in to pay for this YMCA. And so my concern is, since it is a county right now, taxpayers are paying for this YMCA, the YMCA board should have a say from each district.
And Mr. Black, in response to that, I, for one, have no idea how the Y determines their board of directors, but I will ask Mr. Cully to find out how the Y determines their board of directors, and we will respond back, and if we indeed have any input.
Can that put them on the agenda? Can we have that on the agenda for next time? Because last time when Mr. Riley was here, he specifically said last time, we can look at the minutes, that he said the local YMCA committee, which would be the Caroline committee, can be made up by however we want. I mean, we can search that in the minutes as well, because I remember him.
Okay.
I am saying that. So
we'll have
thank you.
Mr. Cully find that out. Mr. Cully's getting sick already, just sitting next to me, but
Thank you.
we will have him find that out. We'll take care. You want to spray? Okay, so that's 5A. We did 6 and 7 before the break. Mr. Fincham, you've got a first reading of a proposed zoning text amendment for farm manager residents.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, you have before you 3 proposed text amendments for first reading, TXT 13 through 15, 2013. You have a brief memo in your packet that kind of explains the background, and you also have some architectural renderings and some photos of the subject property in question that is the basis of these draft amendments for your consideration. The text amendments basically do 3 things. One, it will create a definition of a property manager's residence. It would create a property manager's residence as a use by special exception in the Rural Preservation District, meaning any such application would come ultimately to the Board of Supervisors for approval. The third set of amendments, TXT 15, would add development standards specific to the property manager's residence. And those are listed in the that text amendment. Those standards would be in addition to any other conditions that the Board of Supervisors can impose with any special exception application. As you can see from the pictures, we've been working with an individual. I believe that person's also talked to Mr. Taylor, who owns a historic property in the northern part of the county. As an absentee landowner, well, I shouldn't say absentee, as a landowner who is not there all the time, and with the investment in their property, they are looking for a full-time caretaker to kind of oversee the property in their absence and take care of the day-to-day operations of the farm. There was a lot of discussion about this. Perhaps we should have a larger parcel size than 50 acres. And again, looking at the garden area associated with this particular type of application, I think the commission felt that maybe a 50-acre minimum was appropriate, depending on you know, the day-to-day upkeep that was necessary. So anyway, these are the text amendments. First reading for the board, understanding some of the other residence issues that we've had in the RP district. We thought it was appropriate to bring this forward to the board tonight for your first reading, to see whether you wanted to keep this at first reading and discuss these amendments some more, or whether you were ready to go forward to public hearing with these proposals.
Okay, for one, this particular area, as you've identified with discussions with Mr. Taylor, the zoning in that area is 25 acres.
That would be the overlay district. That would be the resource-sensitive area overlay designation, which has a 25-acre minimum parcel size. The underlying zoning is still rural preservation for the most part.
And RP in that area is?
RP is still 1 per 10.
Okay. So 50 to me just seemed like it was a bit large, but what does the rest of the board think?
Mr. Chairman, one of the concerns I have is I don't want this to turn into some rental unit, that it becomes, you know, an additional dwelling on the property. That I understand how these folks are applying it, but that's one of my concerns, and I don't know how to mitigate that. Mr. Fincham, do you have any suggestions?
Not off the top of my head, sir. In theory, okay, and I think I understand your concern, somebody just renting it out, not necessarily overseeing or working on the property.
Right.
And while that's a standard, that is a difficult issue to enforce, and I agree with you that enforcement of that standard, I think, how we demonstrate that, or how we ensure that the resident actually is an employee supervising that property, we might need to look at that some more. We've got that same issue with some other standards as well, some other uses as well.
That's going to be an issue. That and the 25 acres basically are saying, or 50 as you propose, are saying we are probably going to have to discuss this some more. But Mr. Taylor, your input since you've been involved?
Right, and I do understand what you said, Mr. Sealy. I guess my concern is this particular parcel and this particular house is an extremely nice piece of property. And what the owner was doing was legitimately trying to come up with a means where he could build a caretaker's cottage, if you will, but he wanted something a little bit nicer. And and I assure you, it's not for rental. But this is just this particular instance. I understand what you are saying. So hopefully we can find a way to address this particular one. And then I'm not saying we do that tonight, but hopefully we can come up with verbiage that will address this particular one and also take care of the concern that you have. But, well, for now, I mean, I'll just let it go like that for now.
Any other, and that's part of what we're doing is we're basically creating a county standard.
Right.
So we have to look at it from a county perspective, although the genesis of this particular issue is one particular application.
Yes, sir.
So we could do whatever we want on this one particular application, but then someone else will say, I want the same thing. So we have to kind of work that. I think there's probably some more discussion we need to have on this. Mr. Black, you have any particular concerns? Mr. Underwood?
Not really. I was just asking to talk to Mr. Akers. I apologize for carrying on the sidebar, but we're just talking about how the regulation could work. If possible, could we somehow look at it under a special exception?
That's
Text amendment, rather than-
well, in either case, see, if we did a special exception,
Yes, sir.
then by definition, each one is special and unique.
Right.
Which would mean we would create something for this one. We still have the same issue.
Right.
It's a little easier to say that was different than yours because of location, whatever. It's not a county ordinance. So maybe that's a possibility you can follow too, Mr. Fincham, special exception. That's going to be the end result anyhow.
Yes, sir. I can think of a couple of things, I think, along the lines of what you're discussing. For example, say you own 3 parcels abutting one another that total 150 acres.
Right.
Okay? In theory, you could come in for a special exception for each one.
Right.
You may want to look at some definition or standard of properties under a common ownership to address the abutting property or adjacent property issues that might help address some of the concerns about, in effect, a rental unit on each parcel.
Right.
That's something that might want to consider. One structure per parcel. Again, if you had a 100-acre parcel, as recommended, the minimum size is 50 acres. You could argue that you could come in and apply for a special exception for 2 such structures. I don't think that's the intent. I don't think that's what anybody wants. We may want to clarify that. You might want to limit this, recognizing the background related to this application. You might want to consider either upping the minimum parcel size or consideration that based upon the investment such as National Register designation, it's limited to certain types of properties. Something the board might want to consider
That's a good-
prior to finalizing the standards.
They have
good
spent a
option.
lot of money renovating this. They've taken this down to the
That's
wall
right.
studs.
Really?
And they have rebuilt this entire house. The way it came out was originally before the fire.
I haven't been there for probably 20 years.
Oh, this is 70 years ago, I think it burned. But
All right,
I do
that's good.
agree.
If we get some more options. Mr. Akers, did you have any you wanted to add? I think we covered them all.
No, I think Mr. Fincham needs to
Okay.
come back to us with.
Right, we're going to keep it, all right, that being said, we're going to keep it a first option. I think you've heard the first reading. I think you've heard kind of the concerns. If you could factor those in and give us some options. I do like the National Historic Register option.
Okay.
Which may be good. And then we'll go from there. Don't go anywhere, because you have some first reading for Section 10810 to prohibit panhandling. Oh, well,
I'm going to pass that off to my able assistant.
to what do we owe this pleasure, Mr. Parton?
I'm the panhandler, panhandling guy. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, we don't, not yet developed an actual ordinance, but we did want to bring the issue before you and see if you'd be willing to consider the development of a panhandling ordinance. In all seriousness, the sheriff and Mr. Wilson have grown concerned about the increasing incidence of panhandling, and particularly in Carmel Church at I-95 interchange, and the safety concerns, and also the image that it projects for the county. And typically when you develop a panhandling ordinance, it makes it illegal to distribute information or solicit contributions or attempt to sell services or goods to occupants in an occupied vehicle on the public roadway. And we first developed the ordinance, it was pretty clear cut, and then we thought we would need to develop a possible exemption for volunteer fire departments, volunteer rescue squads, collecting contributions and vehicles and so forth. And
Boy Scouts.
exactly, other charitable organizations. And as it turns out, it's not as simple as simply putting an exemption in. There are legal issues there, First Amendment rights, equal protection rights, and so you can't, again, simply exempt these organizations. And so what it boils down to is options. You can obviously maintain the status quo and not do anything. You can prohibit panhandling entirely and not have any exceptions to that, or you can develop a permitting system, which is what we would recommend, and you can require develop an application for the permit and some review and some standards there, and that would enable organizations such as fire departments and rescue squads to get a permit, and others probably would not be eager to pursue that route, and you could accomplish the same thing. So here to try to find out whether the board would be interested in pursuing that, whether the permit option would be viable, and if so, we'll bring back an actual ordinance and policy.
Okay. May I ask Major Mosier, because during the break they said the genesis of this was the Sheriff's Department. Major, we often develop zoning ordinances and restrictive things and then say it's going to cost us a lot to try to enforce those. How do you think the Sheriff's Department would be able to enforce something like this that they're not already doing now?
I've reviewed the ordinance, and the way it's written, it should be fairly simple to enforce, similar to writing a traffic ticket. And if an individual refuses to cease the panhandling, then they would be incarcerated or taken before a magistrate for a bond hearing. I don't see it as any more inconvenience than writing a traffic ticket.
But I mean, you would have to have extra patrols or extra deputies, wouldn't you, to cover that area?
We already go through that area, and we get calls for these very same panhandlers, and we already have to respond. Now we'll just have something in our ability to address the issue that we haven't had before. So we're still going to the same call. We're still getting the calls. We just now will have something that we can do about it.
Are they the same people over and over again, or?
They're usually transients, and it's different people. Sometimes there are the same ones for a period of time. I think this will discourage it completely and take care of the problem over a period of time, at least from the repeat offenders.
I like the idea, Mr. Chairman, because unless you travel and get off at 95, either going north or going south, you don't experience the problem. I don't think they have Route 1, I don't think they have 301 or 207 or anywhere else. It's on the 95 interchange is where they're located. And to be honest with you, they're not at Ladysmith interchange now. They're at the Carmel Church interchange. But I can tell you it's happened to me, but I've had people that live in the Ladysmith area that have complained and said that we need to do something about it because it does harm the image of the county. People don't know whether they are transients. The traveling public doesn't know whether they're transients or whether they are local people that are out there trying to raise funds. And so, yeah, I like the idea of putting something, or at least looking at how we can manage that process.
I mean, we can look at it. That's why I asked if it was the same people. There are people who this is their job, and they do very well at their job. But last week I was at St. Asaph's for a meeting, and somebody called. They were actually at Carmel Church and had run out of gas or something and needed $20. You know,
we have programs to address that.
And you were there.
Right.
You were there. So that was, you know, that was one case where you could say, okay, I can help this person. You know, I've run out of gas on the road before, not on purpose, and, you know, had to ask somebody I knew for money and didn't ask people that were going by, but maybe they didn't have as much pride, so I don't know.
I definitely don't believe these are people that are running out of gas on 95 and trying to now get money for gas, because every morning, I can tell you, and it may be different people over a 3 or 4 week period,
right,
or a month, but there are people that are there every morning, the same people.
Same
there
people.
every morning
Okay.
that are standing at the same interchange, and